Hello and welcome everybody. Welcome back to Comedian MTG. My name is Ian. On today's episode, we are going to be breaking down the second annual Festival of Nights. This is a cEDH tournament out in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. We had 70-something folks out there for this event, and we're going to break it down. I was able to actually be out there myself, and you'll see my deck list today here in this breakdown. It was a really fun tournament, really good time. They even had a second day event that I also participated in. I just borrowed a friend's deck that was rather silly. Not much to say really there. But shout out to I Blame Max for letting me borrow his super sweet Gav list for that the smaller day 2 event. Yeah, second annual Festival of Nights. We're definitely excited to talk about this event, break it down, and talk about all the decks that we saw at this here tournament. If you like videos like this, make sure to hit that like button, that subscribe button. The new cEDH meta post ban is really fun and exciting, and I'm genuinely enjoying it a whole ton. And yeah, I'm just really happy with where the meta is. Like, it's rather unpredictable. I mean, literally as I'm looking through different tournament results from this very weekend, decks are looking, you know, there's some standouts, some decks that are definitely performing pretty well, but there's also, you know, jumping between these tournaments, different strategies, different things like that are dominant. Some of these decks that are not even showing up in some tournaments are really doing well in other ones. So definitely a lot of really interesting stuff here, and I'm excited to break it all down. Let's get into this stuff. Remember to hit the like button, the subscribe button if you enjoy stuff like this, and if you're interested in supporting the channel, check out patreon.com/comedianmtg. Deck number 1, we have Malcolm's Grixis Pals by Nick0509. This is a Malcolm Vial Smasher list here. Now, once again, one of those strategies that was originally thought to not be doing as well. Malcolm strategies were thought not to be doing as well post-ban, but we're seeing a lot of folks actually just have Malcolm become the mana engine that people are missing when they don't have Jewel Lotus or Mana Crypt in their deck. So Malcolm able to connect with opponents and get those treasures. We definitely see some interesting pirates we don't normally see or haven't traditionally seen in the past. Things like Firebrand and Spyglass Siren in particular stand out, although we do a Spectral Siren as a base of pirates, and then we got our classic pirate Ragavan here. We have our Glinthorn Buccaneer combo, which does go infinite with your commander alone, as long as you're able to get both in for combat and have 2 mana to continue rummaging through your deck. You can ping your opponents down one by one and get 3 treasures as long as you have 3 opponents still remaining. Got Flood Collar here, probably for some flash lines, Talion stuff. We got our classic Thassa's Oracle Demonic Consultation lines in this here deck. I have Demonic Betrayal to steal wins from your opponent's decks with the Lively Dirge tech, which I do think was very good for this Grixis Malcolm list. The ability to just, you know, even if it's just 5 mana, entomb your Glinthorn Buccaneer and get nothing else back, it's still 5 mana, put my Glinthorn on the battlefield, try and go. Pretty solid pickup for a lot of these more graveyard focused black strategies. We've got the classic Turbo Nas stuff in this deck. We have Flare of Duplication in this deck, which is I think why we're seeing some of these red pirates that traditionally have not been played in this strategy, because I think you can flare them, and I think that might be enough to give them a little bit of extra value if you can get these early pirates and then, you know, sacrifice them for counterspells. Turns out they're actually a little bit better than they previously might have been. Got a lot of free interaction in this deck. We got Mindbreak, Force, Fierce, Swat, Flare, like a lot of ways to say no thank you, even Daze in this list, and not even Dimension Pact as well, right? So a lot of ways to say no thanks, I will resolve my spells, or you will not resolve your spells in this deck. A lot of, you know, early acceleration, things like the One Ring and Talion for value. We got Necropotence lines here, and I assume we got a Born Upon the Wind that I passed over earlier. Yeah, so Necro Flash lines here. No Necro Dominance in this version of the list, just sticking with the good old-fashioned Necropotence, trying to crank out a bunch of cards, win with that or ad nauseum, or just doing the classic Glinthorn Buccaneer thing. We also have a Malcolm Vial Smasher here. Davy Jones Locker is number 69, ripped Dockside by Deeds 263. And whenever we have lists of the same commanders, we do a little comparison feature here on the channel. So 13 cards difference here. In our first list, we saw there was an Offer, Mnemonic Betrayal, Mockingbird, the Firebrand, Flare of Duplication, worth highlighting there. No Defense Grid in our version 2 of this deck, and no Talion as well. Version 2, the one we were talking about second, does have the Necrodominance that I called out in the last iteration. This one does have Grinding Station as well, so very interesting differentiation there. Alchemist Retrieval, one of the pieces that people are going to a lot to bounce your own Necrodominance when you're trying to win with the graveyard, and given the fact that we have an extra breach line with Grinding Station and Reanimate and stuff like that, makes a lot of sense. We have a Vexing Bauble, You know, if you're not the one casting the free spells, I guess nobody can. And then we have Kitesail Larcenist here as a pirate with some pretty decent upside here. It seems like they've traded, you know, Italian for a big pirate here in the high end of the curve, and very interesting stuff here between these two Grixis pirate lists. That's funny enough, these are the only two Grixis pirate lists we are going to be talking about here today, and I do find it amusing that they are 15th and 16th respectively in this tournament breakdown. So interesting stuff. Glad to see Grixis pirates did not get absolutely murdered by the Dockside ban and the Jeweled Lotus ban and Mana Crypt ban, but is still alive, kicking, and able to put up some top results at this tournament. Also very impressive given the fact that it was a very grindy tournament, right? So having these decks that have been traditionally considered a little more fragile do well is pretty sweet. We have Blood Vapor by Vaporwave is dead here with this Tana Tavesh list, which is pretty sweet and unique. Now, not a combination I've seen more than maybe once ever, so definitely a really interesting combination here in this deck. We have Wither Smog line, so Witherbloom Apprentice plus Chain of Smog will allow you to discard your whole hand infinitely, drain your opponent's life out that way. This is definitely a very turbo inclined strategy. There's ad nauseum stuff like that in here, but it's also like a Court of Calling deck, which is kind of interesting. It does make sense because your token commanders are both enablers for tokens. Definitely a Skull Clamp deck makes a lot of sense there, and then the rest of the deck seems pretty aggressively junned turbo, but we have this kind of focus on certain creatures here. We also have Kiki Tower Scout as the other main win condition in this deck, it seems like. There's also the Stitcher Supplier Underworld Breach line. For those who don't know, that Stitcher Supplier plus our classic spell Culling the Weak and Underworld Breach. And I actually think this is a pretty underplayed breach line. The fact that it is a breach line that can pay for Rhystic Study is not unimpressive. Now, you're also exiling the same amount of cards you're putting in your graveyard, but people have been playing Grinding Station lines for a while anyway, so I don't really see how this is very much different, but pretty sweet stuff here from this Jund Turbo list. Definitely a lot of pretty wild inclusions here. A lot of it is, you know, very much like I'm going to put as many Jund Turbo cards in the deck as possible, but on the other end of it, there's things like Manglehorn, and you have your creature combos with Kiki. You got 6 there for value, and so there's like a decent amount of different stuff going on here. A lot of creature tutors for a deck that is relatively turbo focused, but at the end of the day, if the creatures are your win cons, it makes sense that you do need to be able to tutor them onto the battlefield. So pretty sweet stuff here from this deck. No Praetor's Grasp for the Tainted Pact in the mana base or in the tutor suite, although Tainted Pact is just kind of one of those tutors that you'd have to give me a really good reason not to be playing in a lot of black decks. And usually the answer is like if you're some sort of deck like Sisay that cares about very specific pieces in your library that cannot be exiled. But congrats to Vaporwave is Dead for bringing a really interesting Jund Turbo list. Dracomancer 7 here with Zurgo and Ojutai Dragon Farm. Back from our shout out at Punt City 3, and also someone I was in a tournament with the week before the bans that I didn't get to shout out. But yeah, Dracomancer has played against me in a number of different events now and made top cuts in several of these events too. Known for this Zurgo and Ojutai Turbo Dragon value deck is like the way I would describe it. It's definitely like a breach deck, right? But it has a lot of these crazy dragon lines in it. It has dragons like Cavern Horde and Goldspan and stuff like that, and then just a bunch of different ways to be able to copy your commander. And yeah, I mean, playing an Auton Soldier to have multiple copies of Zurgo and Ojutai is obviously something that gets out of hand quite quickly. We've got Displacer Kitten and Teferi lines to be able to win the game. As I mentioned earlier, it's also just an Underworld Breach deck. I think winning with the Brain Freeze LED, no Grinding Station, that kind of stuff, right? But genuinely, a lot of the plan with this deck is to get out Zurgo and Ojutai early, and then go, okay, cool, here's my second Zurgo and Ojutai, and they multiply, right? It's not just 2 triggers when you hit with both of those dragons. If you hit with both of them, it's 4 triggers. Then you get another one in there, and suddenly you're getting 9 triggers, right? So 9 impulses every combat does add up and gives you a lot of card advantage. So if you're able to get this commander down, start connecting, it gets pretty out of hand pretty quickly. So Zurgo and Ojutai, super sweet commander. Love seeing Dracomancer show up at this deck. It feels like a deck that you look at and go like, this shouldn't work, right? And then it keeps doing it. And at several events I've been to, it just keeps showing up, crunching in for combat damage, drawn cards. and doing some crazy stuff. So congrats to Dracomancer for another top cut with this really sick Zergo Nojitai list. Hey, you need cards? Cards are good. You might be right now headed to MagicCon Vegas. And if not, you still need cards. So check out ToaMagic.com and use code COMEDIAN at checkout. And if you're heading to a major Magic event, there's probably a Toa Magic booth. If you order cards on ToaMagic.com, you can have them picked up at location. ToaMagic.com/comedian to get great deals on your orders. Fantastic 07? I don't know that. Yeah, sure. With Dominus Marne as before. This is Marneus Calgar, which, according to some numbers, has been peaking up since our ban list change. Marneus Calgar showing off what Esper can do in the current format. We've got a Ballista here as an infinite mana payoff. And we've got a couple ways to make infinite mana. Although Heliod Ballista just in the 99 of this deck, pretty interesting here, right? You also have the Auriok Salvagers combo, which that with LED makes infinite mana at the cost of discarding your hand over and over again. But that being said, you know, hey, if you make infinite mana and you just win the game with your commander, it doesn't really matter if you didn't have a hand for the combo. We have Displacer Kit into Fairy Lines like we saw in our most recent other deck. And then you've got some Thoracally goodness, the classic stuff. We have Labman in here too, just as a backup rendition for that. We've got some stuff that cares about tokens as your commander then draws cards. We have Tivit in the 99. For those who don't know, whenever you do an investigation off of Tivit's ability, it actually counts as a different token entering, as opposed to if you give them treasures, right? So if you have Marneus and Tivit, and you basically have the option to investigate chosen, you're going to draw for each of the clues that comes in, and then draw for one for each the group of treasures, no matter how many treasures there are. So that's a fun little interaction there with these commanders. There's a Priest of Gix in this list, which I can only assume is a Displacer Kitten thing, but it's pretty cool to see it here in this deck. We also have Sorin House Markov, which very sweet stuff here. It does make a token every turn, which then would trigger your commander if you flip it over to its Planeswalker side. So I'm assuming that definitely has something to do with it. Charismatic Conquer, also making tokens, or just making your opponent's stuff come in tapped, like a Blind Obedience effect. We have some board wipes here with Nuclear Fallout. We got a Windfall. I think the Slimer art being prioritized for Windfall is very funny to me. Got some control pieces here. Heliod's Intervention, which is one I have not seen in quite some time, but able to, you know, if your opponents are locking down with Aristic, Mystic, all that kind of stuff, hey, guess what? Put a couple mana into the X part of Heliod's Intervention, and suddenly that is no longer a problem. We have Intuition here, which I'm not really sure if there's a specific line in this deck that I'm missing. I mean, obviously there is Savines, right? So clearly there's something funky going on with the Intuition piles, and I'm assuming the Priest of Gix has something to do with it too. But it's pretty sweet stuff here. We got a Mind Crank in the artifacts, maybe thinks we are on Blood Chief Ascension. Okay, Chthonian Nightmare spotted. So something's going on with that Intuition, Chthonian Nightmare, Savines pile thing going on, and I don't think it's just Priest of Gix on its own. So okay, interesting. What sort of strange loops do we have here in this deck with Chthonian Nightmare that I'm clearly not understanding? I'm not sure, but it's pretty sweet. And if anyone knows what loop I'm missing here with the Chthonian Nightmare Intuition stuff, definitely let me know in the comments down below. Machine Gods FG is also interesting, but I don't think it has anything to do with the thing we just talked about. We do have Time Thief here in the 99, just in case you do get your Tivit down in this deck, which is pretty funny. Just a Secret Commander Tivit in this list. We have Necromancy here as well. Probably reanimating some Tivits and doing some other pretty cool value stuff here. 26 lands. Wow, that is so low. Oh my goodness. That is a crazy low amount of lands for a deck like this. Wow, good for this player. That's awesome. I would never have felt confident in coming in with that few lands in a deck that has, like, I mean, yeah, literally from here past is just 3 drops in this list and above. So a lot of mana value here in this list. That's crazy. I cannot believe that's a 26 land Esper, basically very mana hungry deck. So pretty sweet stuff here from this very spicy Marneus Calgar list. And yeah, definitely curious to see if this build of this deck, this sort of proactive but also controlling variant, is able to continue to put up results. Pretty sweet stuff here. A lot of spicy cards and a lot of interesting stuff, to little different pathways to go down for sure. My eyes do not deceive me. We have Meddlin Kids here with Winota. We have a Winota in the top 16 of this tournament. 52 creature variant of Winota. Definitely some really cool inclusions here. We have Arabella, Abandoned Doll. So this Winota deck definitely gives me a little more aggro vibes than I'm traditionally seeing in Winota, where I got things like Legion Loyalist, which was like a very old Winota inclusion. As I mentioned, Arabella's here doing a lot of damage to your opponents. You got Mind Goblin here for this deck, which I hadn't really explored. Sticker Goblin here, able to do some kind of interesting stuff. Obviously, when you have your Rule of Laws out, not quite as much interesting stuff. We got Delny in the 99, which I know a lot of Winota pilots, Lua included, have been exploring. We got the new Magebane Lizard. Awesome card. Definitely one I haven't had time to test a whole ton of Winota because I haven't really played the deck as much since the Bowmaster's prevalence, but definitely really cool inclusion here with this deck. I'm super geeked to see Winota back out here making performances. Got a Rug of Smothering in the 99 as well. We have the new Jolly Balloon Man, which I do think opens up some really cool combos in the deck. No Kiki stuff here in this variant, just all crunchy, beatdown, damage kind of stuff. We do have Rionia and Combat Celebrant as pretty sure the only hard combo in the deck, and then the rest of the list is beatdown, stacks, all the classic Winota stuff here. Definitely a little lighter on the instants, a little lighter on the artifacts. A Curse Totem in this Winota list, a list that traditionally has played a decent amount of activated abilities on creatures, but this time saying no thank you. We'll shut off our Ranger Captain if it means shutting down the Sisseys and the Thrasioses and all the stuff like that. So definitely taking a risk by shutting down a decent amount of your own permanence here in this deck, but saying, hey, probably worth it. We also see the return of Blood Moon back into the Winota strategy. It is better than ever. No Dockside to punish you for keeping it in the list. And no Null Rod in the deck, but there is a Stony Silence, which I think is a rather interesting choice here for this Winota deck. It feels like definitely want to go on a little bit harder on some of these non-creature stacks and very particular choices here with the one Curse Stone and one Stony Silence. And yeah, really cool stuff. Super geeked to see Winota in the top cut. It's obviously one of my favorite decks of all time, a deck that I personally have a lot of love for, and probably bring her back out for a spin sometime soon. Obviously, this is definitely inspiring. So I'd love to see Winota up here at these top tables. Congrats to Meddling Kids. We have Blue Farm, so original by Velour. This is, yeah, I mean, it's a Blue Farm deck. We have the interesting choice of playing a Volatile Stormdrake in here. Fun new inclusion for some of these Blue Farm lists. It seems like Facebreaker is really becoming a new generation post-Clone Wars professional Facebreaker, which is pretty sweet, or Blue Farm staple, I should say. It is. And so it's interesting to see Facebreaker in these lists. Makes sense. If you're going to combat quite a lot, may as well get a bunch of value off of it. Drannith back in the lineup for Blue Farm staples. So really cool stuff here from this Blue Farm list. Apart from that, kind of the classic Blue Farm packages. You got your classic instances of sorceries, some of the more controlling pieces. You've got all of the things that allow you to be a Necropotence deck as well. A Steel Enchantment, still a piece that people are testing out in Blue Farm and trying, and even in the new meta. And honestly, if people are locking down and going to the grind plan, it makes sense. You're taking their Ristic Studies, taking their Mystic Moors, all that kind of stuff. They're Smothering Tides. So yeah, Blue Farm can do a lot of work with cards like that. 12 artifact Mox Opal package seems to be the new thing for a lot of these Blue Farm decks. Now you do have more treasure creators here with like Facebreaker and stuff like that. So interesting to see such a slim artifact package here, but congrats to our pilot for making the top cut with this Blue Farm deck. Want to thank one of our other sponsors this episode, Heavy Play. Heavy Play is an awesome deck box company. They make cool sleeves, they make awesome deck boxes, dice trays, and play mats and more. I've been using my Heavy Play deck box nonstop since I got it because it is such a good product, and the Heavy Play deck boxes are super strong, super resilient. The magnets have done nothing even close to wearing out at this point. They're super strong and they hold my decks in place. Been a super big fan of the Heavy Play products and super happy to have them sponsor us here on this channel. If you're interested in any of the Heavy Play products, supposedly we have some really cool art mats coming down the line, which you can get the normal magnetic mat style with a little bit of art on it, which is really, really sweet, as the Heavy Play stuff is already super sweet, and getting some cool art on there is going to make it even sweeter. So really sweet stuff. Very excited to see more from Heavy Play and super happy to have them sponsor this channel. If you want to pick up some product from Heavy Play, check out the code COMEDIAN at your order to get a percentage off your first order with Heavy Play. Thanks Heavy Play for sponsoring this video. We have Animus by Lengardal. This is Animar. Animar Slow the Elements. You know, everyone slowed down a little bit, and that's a really good spot for Animar to be, right? It's a deck that's a little bit harder to interact with. If everyone's doing the Thras Timna thing, it has protection from 2 of the colors in that equation, right? Yeah, it's pretty sweet to see Animar back here at some of these top tables, making the top 16 in the tournament, especially because it's a deck that hasn't really been taken seriously for a hot minute. We have the classic Ballista lines. For those who don't know, the traditional Animar win condition is getting Animar high enough so that you can play Ancestral Statue over and over again, which says when it enters, you return an online permanent you control to its owner's hand, which you can choose Ancestral Statue for. So as long as you have 4 counters on Animar, Ancestral Statue then becomes free. So you can do things like loop that over and over again with a Perforos out, deal damage to your opponents. But then there's also just a whole bunch of stuff. The Hullbreaker Horror is really funny in this deck because this is like one of the very few decks where Hullbreaker Horror can combo with creatures because you're playing things like Peregrine Drake and Cloud of Fairies and stuff like that. You've got some interesting Shrieking Drake combos in here. It's a lot of picking up stuff, putting it back down, untapping lands, all that kind of stuff. And then the rest of it tends to just be like, okay, here's as many creatures as we can try and break, where the mana value of those creatures gets significantly reduced by Animar. And then a lot of the other stuff is like stuff like Vision Menagerie and Toski and Radagast that are all just like creatures that gain you a rather comical amount of card advantage. Painter Servant here, very funny inclusion. Painter Servant, not anything, there's no like Grindstone or anything in the deck. It's just Painter Servant. It makes every spell either white or black so that your commander has protection from it, which is pretty sweet. So basically, in this list, you're trying to play Animar, get some counters in Animar. You're either trying to, do the Agate Instigator, Perforos thing with Statue, or you're trying to loop some of these pieces like looping with Hullbreaker or using Peregrine Drake over and over again to be able to win the game with your list here. Glimpse of Nature, pardon me, something that also works on Ancestral Statue. Every time you cast it, you're drawing a card, right? You do that over and over again, draw through your whole deck. Very few interactive pieces here. Very classic Animar thing. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 counter spells, 1 snap, 1 Veil of Summer, right? So definitely a very slim interaction package. Animar, a deck that thrives when it does the Animar thing. It tries to go, 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 win, 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 and play a bunch of creatures while you're doing it. So cool stuff here from Animar. Cool to see it kind of back in the equation. It's a deck I've always thought was super interesting, but just hasn't really been positioned well enough to do anything in a hot minute. So cool to see Animar back in action. We have Twang here with I Believe in the World You Will Build, with the run it back attempt, as he was the original winner of the first Festival of Nights. Here he's playing Thrasios and Timna. Let's check the land base, because I feel like that informs a little bit about this Thrasios Timna deck. I did actually play it in the day 2 event against Twang's build here of this Thrasios Timna build, but this is just pretty good value pile Thrasios Timna, which is just back in business. This is a good deck again nowadays, right? So new reality for cEDH. Thrasios Timna back to being one of the top dogs in the format. And Twang here playing a cool Thras Timna list. You have your very high value 4-color partner pile. Then you have a bunch of different combos in the deck. So you take things like Devoted Druid, and you can either put a Machine God's Effigy on it, which this deck is choosing not to do, or Swift Reconfiguration. So Swift Reconfiguration able to turn Devoted Druid into a vehicle and then make infinite green by putting -1 counters on it, but because it's a vehicle, it's not a creature, and you'll be able to make infinite mana that way. You also have Hazel's Brewmaster, which if they have Devoted Druid in the graveyard, you're able to play the Brewmaster and exile the Druid, making a food token that has the Devoted Druid's abilities. Same thing, you're going to be able to put -1 counters on the food token because it's an artifact, and untap it a bunch, making infinite green mana. You're pumping all of that mana into Thrasios, which is pretty sweet. Got Subtlety here as a counter spell on a stick, an extra force effect for this deck. We've got some value creatures here with things like Lotho and Fairy Mastermind and Orcish and Lavinia to shut down your opponent's free interaction as well. Draneth, once again, up again, taking a priority in this new matchup. Do we have Derevi in here? Not just there's no like combo with Derevi. Derevi just here, crunching value, doing taps, doing untaps, all that kind of nonsense. Scheming Symmetry is a fascinating inclusion that I did not expect to be in a Timna Thrasios deck. Feels like a very very proactive type card. So in Timna Thras, it seems like a very aggressive line here, but it is Twang who tends to play aggressively as it is anyways. A lot of really cool stuff here. Plunge into Darkness I haven't seen since Food Chain back in like 2018. So funny inclusion here with that specific piece. I'm assuming it's just a high value, pay a bunch of life, look for a card, but pretty sweet stuff there. Main win conditions, as I mentioned, are those infinite mana lines. There's a lot of free interaction in this deck. We got Misdirection, Submerge, Force of Will, Snuff Out, Force of Vigor. Yeah, this deck is just chalked to the brim of I'm going to play my 2 commanders out early and then hold up as much free interaction as possible and then trying to sneak in a win, which for anyone who knows Twang, very, very much on brand here. You got your Thoracle Consult wins, you've got your infinite mana wins, and that's how the cookie crumbles, and then you're trying to use these combos to be able to leverage a victory. So congrats on the top cut. We have Master of Keys by R. Deller, and this is a Master of Keys list. This here is one of the first top cuts we're seeing with the Master of Keys, although the card's starting to pick up momentum. I think people were struggling a little bit early on with how they can build it, because I've worked with a couple people with this deck, and there's definitely a lot of different branching paths for what you can choose to do with this specific commander. So we have a Master of Keys list here, and let's dive into it a little bit. We've got the Teferi Time Raveler here, which means we probably have Displacer Kitten as we do. Some reanimation stuff here. We got some Abdel Hullbreaker lines, and I'm assuming there's going to be some Animate Deads and Dance of the Deads. Yep, we got Animate Dead, we have Dance of the Dead, and we got Necromancy here in these enchantments. This is definitely one of the more enchantment heavy versions of Master of Keys I've seen, which I really like. I think obviously the more you feed into the thing that your commander is really good at, the better it can give you a dividend here, right? We have things like Static Prison, which are very good to be able to loop out of the graveyard. Tiny Bones joins up, assuming, well, obviously it wins with the Abdel Adrian lines. Can also technically win with Hullbreaker lines as a payoff there. So one of the easiest ways to sort of win post infinite mana, and I'm assuming that's just the main cause for it as well. Blind Obedience, also another way where you can win with infinite mana, because with this deck in particular, you are making infinite mana, you are then casting the Master of Keys for a deck's worth of milling. And then you can start casting enchantments out of your graveyard, and hopefully those enchantments are letting you win the game. Now, sometimes you can just Animate Dead Thassa's Oracle out of your graveyard, unless you're like me and you realize that this deck is not playing Thassa's Oracle at all, and therefore can't do the thing that I just said, which is definitely surprising. This is no Thassa's Oracle, no Demonic Consultation. Is there even a Tainted Pact? No, not at all. This version of Master Keys saying, I'm going to win with the other stuff. Who needs Thassa's Oracle? Who needs Demonic Consultation? Those cards are not for me, which is definitely something I'm surprised by for sure, as you can tell by the way I'm talking about this. Yeah, heck yeah. No Thoracle, no Consult. I mean, it doesn't help with the main game plan whatsoever, so it does kind of make sense to not include it in this variant. And yeah, now we got a 17 enchantment, full sort of Master of Keys grindy deck that's trying to crank out the Master of Keys, play some really cool value enchantments, and then apart from that, do a lot of the Esper value stuff. So bold choices here in this super interesting Master of Keys Esper list. No Thoracle in sight, and making a statement, who needs it? And still able to take down 7th place at this cEDH tournament. We have the balls rolling uphill front runner by me. This is my Thrasios Bruce Tarl. I brought back Dawnwaker. I said, hey, I think the meta is in a place where I can play this deck again. And you know what? It did pretty well for me. I actually did not lose a game until the semifinals, and unfortunately did not get to make it to the finals match, but went 2 wins and 3 non-intentional natural draws during the Swiss. So just draws that actually went to time. I had one of the craziest games, which I had to shout out in this tournament breakdown, in which it was myself, a Kark Sakashima player, the very spicy Orzhov list that you're about to see after this, and a Kinnan player that actually our round straight up went to 2.5 hours. This was a Swiss round, by the way. This is not the semifinals, but because we played the normal length of the round, there was a turn in which it was my turn and I was trying to win the game. And we had 2 Rhystic Studies, a Consecrated Sphinx, and a Kark Sakashima pairing that made that go. I think someone said the final count was like 68 minutes overtime. So Yeah, crazy stuff from that round, but I had to shout that one out. Anyways, coming back to this deck, this is my Domiker Thrasios list in its most recent iteration. Domiker Thrasios is a pairing of Thrasios and Bruce Tarl built around the interaction of having Zerda the Dawnwaker and having Thrasios in the command zone, in which not only does it decrease the mana value needed for Thrasios' activated abilities, but Zerda in particular combos and makes infinite colorless mana very easily with Grim Monolith and Basalt Monolith. Very sweet combos there, very easily make infinite colorless mana. And if you know infinite mana with Basalt Monolith, you will also recognize that as a win condition with Kinnan as well. So Kinnan Basalt is in the deck with Thrasios as the outlet. I also included Devoted Druid and Swift Reconfiguration in this list. If you notice, I did not include Machine God's Effigy. I really only wanted one Devoted Druid payoff in the list as of right now. I'm still definitely experimenting with the numbers. There was definitely stuff I realized as I was playing through the deck that I'm still looking to adjust as we're moving forward, and definitely making adaptations to in this current cEDH format. There's still a lot to the deck, and you know, some of those longer games I wanted a way or two to punch through when I had a decent amount of advantage already set up. But yeah, this deck is 100% just, I'm trying to make infinite mana in as many ways as possible. So you have, once again, Devoted Druid, Swift Recon, you got the Zerda and the Kinnan, infinite mana lines. We also have Emil, you'll notice in this deck, Emil plus Derevi plus Gaia's Cradle is a combo, Emil plus Bloom Tender plus Derevi with 4 colors is a combo. There's also other combos that get more nuanced with Kinnan and Zerda and stuff like that. There's a lot of like really intricate layering that can come up in some of these combos as well. But this deck is pretty classic. Like, you're trying to grind with Thrasios really hard. It's a Seaborn Muse deck through and through. It's a deck that tries to, you know, it may be not as crazy when you resolve a Seaborn Muse as like something with Kinnan, right? Because this is definitely like a very classic Seaborn Muse where it's like, no, I'm trying to get an activation or two every turn. I'm trying to be responsible with a card like Seaborn Muse for multiple turns in a row. And if eventually I can turn the corner, that's awesome. But until then, I'm going to play it very much like a very responsible controlling deck with some creature combos baked into it as well. Playing Consphinx in the 99 because, yeah, sometimes you just need to tap out for a Consphinx. I will say there were multiple times I had the opportunity to cast Consecrated Sphinx during this tournament and chose not to. So that to me was a little bit indicative of the fact that like maybe Consphinx wasn't 100% where I wanted to be with the deck, but at the same time, I'm not sure if that was just because at those times I had the luxury of other card advantage engines that I had access to. So, you know, there's definitely a lot of thoughts kind of going back and forth in my head about like where to take this deck next. There's a lot of stuff into it, as I mentioned, a lot of interesting stuff here. And, you know, at the end of the day, there's a lot of like 4-color value pieces, right? Things like Archivist, and you got your Grand Abolishers and your Ranger Captains, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, no, I truly adore this deck. Some stuff that you probably haven't seen from it in the past before. Things I included Snap for the Eternal Witness Snap line. That was just a line that never really came up. I drew Snap once during the course of the event, and it not being a piece of hard removal definitely was irksome for me, and I definitely wanted to be a piece of hard removal. Obviously, it's a combo piece in this deck and technically some soft removal, but this is what happened last time, included Snap, where I looked at it and I was like, man, you really aren't helping me a whole ton, Snap, and I'd rather just have a hard answer to some of the problems that I'm going to be going up against from my opponents. So Snap probably not making the final iteration. Same thing with Agatha Soul Cauldron. As cool as the card is, it came up like I had the opportunity to play it once or twice, and then it just wasn't relevant when I went to play it in those situations. And then it did you know, help out in a game or two, but like realistically, something like a Sabine's Reclamation to just take my things out of the graveyard and like give a second shot at some of these combos would have been much more impactful than Agatha's Soul Cauldron. So as excited as I was to test Agatha's, it kind of underperformed for me in this deck in particular. Obviously Agatha's a really good card. The Incidental Graveyard Hate mode of it's really sweet. It just didn't do enough for me because not all of my combos use activated abilities. Some of them do, right? Like you've got your Emil, you've got Devoted Druid, right? But that's really, and like your mana dorks like Bloom Tender, right? But that's really the crux of it. There's not, you know, there's many combos like I mentioned earlier, like the Zerda or the Kinnan and all those kinds of things that like have zero interaction with with the Soul Cauldron. So definitely not an inclusion I was super stoked with. The rest of it feels pretty good. As I mentioned, the deck has been sort of on the shelf in the last iteration of the metagame for a minute, but also like I think it got punished a lot for like playing some of these value engines that you really need for a Thrasios deck that cares about Seaborn Muse and Thrasios activation so much, right? Like with Thrasios and Tymna, you could always sort of like just play the Tymna plan and work with that, right? With this deck, you need a bunch of mana, right? Which did mean in the old format, you were feeding Dockside at least a semi-healthy amount because you want as many things that produce mana as possible, and therefore you're putting them on the board. You're not winning super explosively, right? So it got punished by Dockside a decent amount. And then you also like have to just play a bunch of mana engines because you want to be able to play them and grind with Thrasios, right? So definitely some reprieve given to this deck. Even though it lost Dockside, which is one of the cleanest enablers in the list, what it got instead was the ability to sort of operate at a speed where the format's more comfortable for it, for sure. So I was super happy with how the deck performed in general. It's one of my favorite decks of all time. There's a deck tech on it of this very channel. I truly do enjoy this deck a whole bunch. Oh, by the way, Minsc and Boo overperformed for this deck again. You play it on one turn, you pump the Boo up, and then if you have situations where you can get that -2 ability down, it's removal, it's card draw, and it really gives you a lot of advantage the turns you're trying to win. Really fascinating stuff from this card. It's not like, oh my God, it's breaking the format good. It's just like it was a good value player, and being able to have removal in a format in which having removal is pretty vital at times. It's especially in the grindier games. Minsc and Boo really did put in some pretty decent work, right? I usually only needed to activate it once or twice, but it did what it needed to do for sure. I love this deck. Happy to continue working on it. It's been a passion project of mine for a very long time, and I'm glad that it feels like playing it again isn't just like a personal choice, but also something that I'm very excited to be doing. Right, like it's a deck that I spend a lot of time working on, and excited to continue letting the ball roll uphill. Major shout out to It's Melon here with this. I think you said it's like Montsegur, maybe. But this is Kambal Profiteering Mare, and I've actually played against this deck before in some smaller tournaments, and this deck is pretty sweet. It is a really, really interesting Orzhov list. I've played against it a couple times, as I mentioned, and it's kind of like tempo Kambal almost, right? Because you're really trying to play some disruption, out tempo your opponents while also just getting some incidental value with your tokens, draining the life out of your opponents, and then using pieces like early Ceres and stuff like that to put a lot of pressure on your opponent's life totals. You have Walking Ballista in the list for Heliod combos. I got some interesting stuff here with like Teysa, making multiple tokens that way. This is a Mirkwood Bats deck, straight up, like you are trying to make tokens, drain your opponents. There are Abdel Adrian lines in here as well, in which like all of these token payoff things pay off obviously really well with Abdel Adrian because it works well with your commander. It's an outlet for these combos, right? You have things like the Ratadrabic and Boromir combo. For those who don't know, Ratadrabic allows whenever another legendary creature you control dies, create a token that's a copy of that creature, except it's not legendary, and it's a 2/2 black zombie. So what you do with Boromir, because the first mode on the ring tempts you, is that you choose a creature to be your ring bearer, right? So what you do is you actually sack Boromir, stack it so the Ratadrabic trigger happens before the ring tempts you trigger. And then you make the token copy of Boromir that you get from Ratadrabic a legendary creature, and therefore you can sack that over and over and over again, and it's infinite sacrifices. So you just need an outlet to pay off for those things like Marionette Apprentice or Ellis of Core, all that kind of stuff. So pretty sweet inclusions here with this deck. We have Silver Quill Lecturer. Creatures you control have demonstrate. Whenever you cast a creature, you may copy it. If you do, choose an opponent to also copy it. So this is really interesting because you cast a creature, and then you may copy it. So you choose to copy it, and you give your opponents a token copy of it as well. But then Cabal will trigger and say, oh, hey, look, your opponent just made a token, which is a token copy of the copy that you already made. And then you get a copy of their copy. Can I say copy anymore? Which is really, really cool. We have Chain of Smog here for, is there Liliana that I just missed? No, there's no Liliana here. What are you Chain of Smogging in this deck? What? This isn't fair Chain of Smog, is it? No, it can't be. We have Awaken the Earthswell. Maybe this is fair Chain of Smog. This is really, I've never seen this in the deck. Even though I've played against it a couple times, you just make everyone discard their hands and make that many 2/2 zombies. Okay, sick. I feel like the Orzhov deck takes advantage of that kind of stuff way better, especially if you have your commander out. What am I missing with this Chain of Smog? Or is it really just playing Chain of Smog the way Chain of Smog was originally meant to be intended, which is like you hit one person with it and then everybody starts shredding each other's hands? Oh, you have the Sedmore Witch here. Okay. Okay, this is the combo. Okay, because Sedmore Witch says Magecraft, when you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, you make a 1/1, right? So if you have your commander out and you have the witch, you Chain of Smog yourself, and then you make infinite pest tokens, but each pest that comes in is triggering your commander, which is then draining your opponents out of life. Understood. Okay, cool, 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 cool. So there is just actually a Chain of Smog combo in this deck to make infinite 1/1s. Sweet stuff here. We got Drawn Lavala hating on activated abilities, which is probably really relevant for this format right now. Yeah, this list is super sweet, and obviously it's a super off-the-wall commander. Cabal here able to come out with the best record here of everyone who didn't make the top 4. So congrats to It's Melon for this very sweet list. I think it's just so cool to look at, and it does a lot of really, really interesting stuff. I loved it the first moment I played against it, the first tournament I played against it, and yeah, it's just kept being a super cool and interesting deck, and super wild to watch it be played. Into the top 4, we have Major Briggs's Vision for Bobby by Gold Sabertooth, cEDH's most beloved artist. Gold Sabertooth, known for doing a lot of really cool playmats and stuff like that all around the cEDH space. Here with this Thrasios Tevesh list, which is not something I've known Gold to play, but able to bring it all the way to the top 4 of this tournament with a pretty sweet list here. So we have our Kinnan here, most likely for a Basalt Monolith combo if I would be a betting man. Aha, and a bet would have paid off. We got a Machine God's Effigy, which means that I'm assuming there's going to be a Devoted Druid up in here with the creature base as it is. We got Thassa's Oracle, the Demonic Consultation combos. We also have Hullbreaker Horror lines in this deck, which is pretty sweet. This deck definitely having a big top off. We've got Displacer Kitten to loop with Tevesh. We got Seedborn, Consphinx, Hullbreaker, and 13 mana Emrakul. This deck does not chill out at the top end of its curve by any means. I mean, all of these are just mana producers. You have things like Kinnan to double the amount of mana production that you have. You have things like Culling Ritual to be able to wipe all of your dorks, but on the other hand, being able to pay off things like, Seedborn or Hullbreaker, Emrakul, all that kind of stuff is pretty good payoff here. We got Mnemonic Betrayal to be able to win with your opponent's graveyards. Some proactive stuff here, definitely no ad nauseum, but this is still a deck with calling the weak and saying, yeah, we can call stuff, just not throwing it into an ad nause. Big artifact package here. We got our 1 ring for value, all that kind of stuff. And still having Necropotence lines in this deck. You got the high value, but all those high value permanents don't stop Necro. And you've got Born Upon a Wind here in this deck, and you got the Valley Flood Caller to be your instant speed payoffs in case you use some pretty proactive Necro stuff here. So congrats to Gold, great community member, awesome person. If you want to see Gold talk about a deck that is currently banned, we have a deck tech here with him on the channel about Nadu. But Gold, super awesome pilot, super cool brewer, and really cool to see him up here in the top 4 of this cEDH tournament. We have You're Confused, I'm Confused by Taka. Taka, the player who knocked me out during the top 16, playing Inala Archmage Ritualist. Inala, maybe it's time to shine. I noticed when I did my top 50 breakdown, a lot of Inala pilots ran to the comments to say, no, we think Inala got paid off by these bans, and we're pretty excited about what the future holds. We have the classic Inala Spellseeker line. For those who don't know, Inala plus Spellseeker, you don't need to ever cast your commander. You just need to basically play a Spellseeker, as this is a 1-card combo deck. You play Spellseeker and you make a copy of it with Inala's abilities. You can win with Spellseeker plus a single black mana, and then you are off to the races and churning through spells in your deck. We don't have to go into the nitty gritty too deep, but basically you end up going through a chain of tutors with Spellseeker, with the end state being you are looping Scholar Mages over and over again with something like a Shallow Grave. Over here in the instance spots, we got a Shallow Grave, which is right here. Yeah, so you're looping Shallow Grave over and over and over again in a lot of these scenarios, and you're able to make infinite token copies of something like your 3/3 here, Scholar of Ages, and also like occasionally generate infinite black and infinite red mana as well as you're going through that. And basically, yeah, you just playing Spellseeker gives you the opportunity to just start looping and looping and looping and looping and looping. And yeah, it uses a lot of graveyard, uses a lot of instant sorceries, but you know, suddenly it's just one card. Hey, I win the game with this deck. So Inala showing up, doing work. You have a Thoracle Doxa or Thoracle Demonic Consultation combos. This deck is in fact a breach deck as well. You've got Necro Lines in this list, so you have pivot plans even if the Spellseeker thing goes horribly awry and gets Mindbreak trapped or whatever it might be. So a lot of really cool stuff here from Taka in this top 4 placement. Inala may be back, ready to take some names here in cEDH. Sisay is not dead, friends. We have Oath of Sisay here by Teleria East with some really interesting inclusions. Teleria sent me a little bit of a breakdown right before this video, as you knew I would be talking about this performance and this deck. Made some notes about the interesting stuff here. I did DM him asking why he cut Fabro Elder like a cEDH Sisay All-Star. As of the time of recording, he did not get back to me on that one in particular, but definitely left me with a pretty interesting amount of insight on some of these inclusions and exclusions here in the deck. Sisay's definitely changed to adapt to the meta, and to adapt to no longer having Dockside or Jewel Lotus or Mana Crypt. And so there's some interesting stuff here. We still have our classic lines going to Animatu, Nicol Bolas, Oath of Teferi combos. All of that stuff is still perfectly fine. A lot of these decks are using the Dihada and Chromatic Orrery and Cultist of the Absolute lines that are in the deck nowadays. I was told by Teleria that this is, quote, our 7-mana Dockside. So Chromatic Orrery, definitely the explosive combo. And I think a lot of Sisay palettes knew, like, as soon as Dockside was banned, this was the fastest thing you could be going for, was the Chromatic Orrery. So it was sort of the default option at that point. Noticing a lot more of these everything can tap for mana effects. So Isika, God of the Tree, I've noticed in basically every Sisay deck that has done well lately. Definitely very solid ability to turn all of your legendary creatures into mana dorks, and also give them vigilance. They can attack freely as well. Enduring Vitality, Cryptolith right on a body. And yeah, once again, we want our creatures to be able to tap for mana because Sisay is an explosive, very mana hungry deck. We've got Marvin the Murderous Mimic, which definitely is a super interesting card, and basically at times allows your mana dorks to have haste, right? Because as soon as you play them, Marvin gains the ability, and if Marvin's already been on the battlefield, hey, you got a hasty dork going on here. You got your Bloom Tenders here, got Magda, which according to our pilot here, has the ability to do a lot of really interesting stuff in the deck, apart from, you know, just attacking and making a treasure for your commander. To be able to activate Sisay's abilities, you can also, if you ever get to 5 treasures, just put the Chromatic Orrery on the battlefield, which is pretty sweet. Teleria said that Bowmasters was a little underwhelming, and he was considering taking that one out. And there's also combos in this list with, if you get Marvin and Ioreth, they are both legendary permanents that can tap each other. So you would just have Ioreth untap Marvin and another legend, or you'll have Marvin untap Ioreth and another legend, and then make any sort of legends that are tapping for mana and turn those into infinite mana with those cards, which is pretty sweet here. We have Gigantha in the 99, a choice that I've been pretty, I think, vocally against for a while here, but Jeggy in the 99 picking up play, because a lot of folks are just trying to get your 5 mana all in one spot and then just start tapping and winning the game. But congrats to Larry East on your 2nd place finish here at this cEDH tournament. You had a pretty sick run here with this list. Oh, actually more interactive Sisay than in the past. Also, a bunch of Sisays are picking up this Galadriel's Dismissal card, able to phase your opponent's board states out, but also to protect and phase out your own creatures as well, which is pretty sweet stuff. But congrats to Teleria on your top 4 run here on the cEDH tournament. We have Smoked Whitefish Salad by Max P MTG. Max P, a player who has been playing cEDH for a hot minute at this point, and someone who has been at the top tables of a lot of events at things like the Invitational and stuff like that throughout the years. Also a host of the Win In podcast and claiming his first cEDH tournament win here at this festival with the Thrasios Tymna list. And you know what we're going to be doing, whipping up a comparison page to talk about the difference between his and Jorman's list. So we got a 26 card difference here between these decks. Let's already check, see how many lands Max is running. He is, 27 lands for the both of these two players here with these decks. So the Smoked Whitefish Salad, our winning deck list, was on Basalt Monolith. On Ether Vial, to flash in creatures, get a bunch of values in, and get uncounterable creatures in from your hand. Pretty cool stuff here, and hasn't really seen play in a hot minute. Got Training Grounds for grinding value. Got Birthing Pod going up the curve on your creatures. Grand Abolisher in this version. I did not realize that Grand Abolisher was not in Twang's version of this deck, which is pretty crazy stuff. No Born Upon a Wind in our winning deck list. No Dranith in our winning deck list. No Poliwag. Definitely a lot of different choices here between these two decks for sure. Our winning list being on Grim Monolith and a bunch more artifacts in this version on Smothering Tithe, on Culling Ritual. So definitely more value, more explosive stuff on Retraction Helix, Valley Flood Caller lines in this different variant. And on Mnemonic Betrayal, able to flash in Mnemonic Betrayal wins. This version, on Cutzel and Grand Abolisher, where our other version is not. This one's on Kin and Basalt. A lot of different high value sort of stuff here. I'm not a believer in the Retraction Helix combo. I know a lot of people are testing it out in these lists, but really interesting stuff here. I just think a 1-mana blue instant is the most counterable card type, right? So it's really hard to sort of have my faith in a combo like that, but kind of wild. And this is one thing I've always kind of liked about Thrasios Tymna being one of the top decks, that it can be built in such different ways. And like, are these both mid-rangey Thrasios Tymna piles? Absolutely, right? But we have two top performing lists, one our winning list here, with completely different combos than the other list, with things like Culling Ritual to blow up your own stuff, Smothering Tithe, Birthing Pod, which is definitely not the most common choice in this archetype. But our other list, once again, not even playing Grand Abolisher and Cutzel, right? This list, being on things like Derevi and a lot more tempo-y, and just like sort of also a ridiculous amount of free interaction from our previous Thrasios and Tymna list. So really cool to see how, literally a quarter of this deck, and not even including the fact that if you take out 30 lands, this becomes like a third of the non-land cards in this deck are different from that of our list from earlier. And so our game-winning deck having Thrasios and Tymna built in a wildly different way. So congrats to Max P on the Smoked Whitefish Salad tournament win here with the Thrasios Tymna list. It's a long time coming. Max is a great player, and definitely a great run to take down this whole tournament. A lot of really cool stuff coming out of this Thrasios and Tymna build, and once again, drastically different from a deck that's doing a lot of the same stuff. So really cool to see the flexibility of the format. Really awesome to see just how many amazing things can happen in these cEDH games. Really sweet stuff, and definitely excited to see more. Thank you all for watching this video. The cEDH meta is wide open. There's a lot of really cool stuff going on, and I'm super excited to keep exploring it with you all. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch y'all next time. Peace.